Is Donald J. Trump a spy? That's the central question of this discussion. The indictment of a former president who also is a candidate for the second-term presidency triggered a mass sentiment with divided forecasts. I shall say upfront that this presentation shall not be misconstrued as a legal prediction or advice. What you see is a civilized curiosity, and I am among the majority of Americans that closely follow this case. As a law degree holder, knowing my limits, I will not comment on an ongoing case and will let the parties do their jobs and let the process unfold. I am presenting the results of my empirical, retrospective, quantitative study as well as the legislative history of several statutes governing the presidential records and certainly the Espionage Act of 1917, which is the prime law laid in Trump's indictment of June 8th. The act was a panic response during Wilson's term in World War I, and it meant to restrict the First Amendment, specifically targeting outspoken Social Democrats and Communists in World Wars I and II and post-war eras. Now you will ask, but Trump is a conservative whose policies are favoring small businesses, free market, and limited government. Yet initially, the Espionage Act was hunting the socialists and communists. How can we make sense of it? Before it was Dalton Trumbo, a communist, now is Donald Trump, a capitalist. Here we have to remember Winston Churchill. Politics is like waking up in the morning. You never know whose head you'll find on the pillow. In 1918, Chapter 1 of the Espionage Act was adjusted to a worse version, the Sedition Act, which was repealed in 1920, of course. So Trump's indictment is not necessarily a concurrent attack on the First Amendment, nor the Espionage Act is always about catching spies. Then why the government relied on that criminal statute rather than the Presidential Records Act of 1978 when the matter was about the presidential records? To address my civic curiosity, I did some homework. In particular, I empirically analyzed 32 randomly located published court decisions under the Espionage Act of 1917, the Sedition Act of 1918, the Smith Act of 1945, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978, the Classified Information Procedures Act of 1980, the Economic Espionage Act of 1996, Presidential Records Act of 1978, several executive orders, other federal statutes, and restatements of the law. I named my study From Schenck to Trump. The highlights of the 32 cases spanning from 1919 to 2014 are provided on slides 15 to 21. Before I will share the results of my study, I need to remind you about the specifics of the Espionage Act. Although the first chapter, 791, was changed to Sedition Act and then repealed, the remaining chapters from 792 to 799 are still strongly effective laws. Trump is indicted under the Chapter 793E. See the title on this slide? The bar under this chapter is so low that the prosecution has no burden to prove criminal scienter or intent, and because of that, I think the defense will not survive. Further, the allegations excluded the Presidential Records Act as that civil act allows grace period, which the Espionage Act doesn't recognize, and also the need-to-know waiver under Obama's Executive Order number 13526 could be challenged by the Presidential Records Act Chapter 1270.50E that gives the archivist the final say. So, under the Espionage Act, intent, actual harm, or consequences are not important. It's an easy case for prosecution. My study aimed to find a predictive value by running Pearson correlations between the numerical or continuous variables to find associations between the defendant's age, income, counts of charges, and judicial outcomes such as durations of imposed sentences. I also intended to conduct a correlation between the binary variables like defendant's gender, nationality, marital status, former convictions, physical or mental health, criminal intent, death penalty, and the case outcomes, as well as attributable risk and inverse causation analysis. Monte Carlo iteration was sought for prediction, but as Cronbach's alpha failed to show internal consistency and scale reliability between the groups stratified by charges and statutory provisions, there was no point to proceed with prediction analysis. Rather, the results and conclusions are based on descriptive statistics, itemized point-by-zero correlations, and mean difference statistics. See slides 23 to 27. You will probably have a later look at the results, my 15 conclusions, also some interesting facts, remarkable holdings and dissents, but before you do, I want to summarize important points. To my question, is Donald Trump a spy? The answer is certainly not. The Chapter 793 of the Espionage Act does not even raise such inquiry. The Act of 1917 has the power to convict a person just based on the latest mere words of persuasion. Intent is not important. The actual harm element or consequences are not important either. The government can base the case on perceived disloyalty or danger. This is a heaven for prosecution. Based on the studied 32 cases, the Espionage Act and similar statutes disproportionately target male suspects with a male-female ratio of 4.67, which is also confirmed by Cohen and point-by-zero correlations establishing inverse associations between the defendant's female gender and prison durations. Also, findings suggest that all 17 cases, including 51 charges brought under the Espionage Act, fell in the presidential terms of Wilson with the Attorney Generals Watt and Palmer, FDR, A.G. Biddle, Truman, A.G. Clark and McGrinery, Reagan, A.G. Smith and Miss, and Obama, A.G. Holder. Sensibly, the sample was too small for the external validity, but the picture is that with one exception only, that is Ronald Reagan, all cases were filed during the terms of Democratic presidents, specifically in relation to the Espionage Act allegations. Further, the First Amendment defense against the Espionage Act charges fails always. The defense by equality and due process clauses under the 5th and 14th Amendments has only 33% of success rate. There are many other conclusions that you will check yourselves. And finally, as usual, I conclude with a quiz of multiple choice questions, which I write, and the answer key is on slide 42. We will part now, so you will navigate through the slides on your own.